Hey, Marvel. It's everywhere, right? You can't escape it. We've seen all the Comic-Con announcements, all the D23 announcements. It's Phase 4. It's huge. There's like a bazillion things in the works, and all of them are super exciting. And one of the especially exciting things about all of it is how many of these projects are based on really specific comic book stories. What are those? Huh? Are they? Yes, they are. And hey, here's the thing about comic books. Fucking nobody reads them. The fact that in a post-Marvel Studios world, reading comic books is like a niche interest still is fucking ridiculous. More people should read comic books. People don't read comic books and I'm mad about it. I'm drinking LaCroix. It's passion fruit, because I'm passionate about this. Everybody wants to be the guy who can tell their friends all about comic books. Believe me, that's a super popular guy to be. I'm just kidding. Everyone hates that guy. But let me tell ya, if you know what happens in the comic books, it makes the movies a lot more fun. I can speak from experience. And hey, if you're like, oh, I would love to read comic books, where should I start? Here's what I think you should read. I'm gonna clue you into a handful of comic book stories that directly inspired movies or TV shows on Marvel's upcoming slate. Just a heads up, not all of these projects are based on specific comic books, but some of them are. So for the ones that don't have really clear source material, I'm just gonna give the predictions, what I think might become source material. So let's look at that slate. First up, in May of 2020, is Black Widow. As far as what we know about the movie right now, we know it takes place between Civil War and Infinity War in a time when Natasha is basically defected from the US government and is on the run as a fugitive with Captain America and Falcon. Steve and Sam are probably gonna be in it, right? Like, it'd be super weird if they weren't in that, right? Anyway, doesn't matter. We also know that the movie is going to deal with the continued influence of the Red Room on Natasha's life, considering that Florence Pugh is most likely playing Yelena Belova, another Red Room assassin, presumably tracking Black Widow down, probably? Or maybe they're friends. I don't know. We'll see. This is a great example of a comic book that doesn't have a super clear source material, but if I had to guess, I would say check out Black Widow by Mark Waid and Chris Samnee. This is a nice, short, 12-issue series with very little dialogue and tons of action. This series opens with Natasha defecting from S.H.I.E.L.D. and having to escape a helicarrier mid-air. It fucking rules. It deals a lot with the Red Room and its continued influence over Natasha and her life. Also features another assassin. Not exactly Yelena Belova, but they're kind of similar. And I do seem to remember that when this issue came out, there were a lot of think pieces written about how cinematic it was, and how if Marvel were to think about making a Black Widow movie, they should use this series as inspiration. Next up in fall of 2020 is Falcon and Winter Soldier, which is going to be a limited series on the Disney Plus streaming service. And I can say really confidently that you should check out Nick Spencer and Daniel Acuna? I'm 70% sure it's Acuna. Nick Spencer and Daniel Acuna's run on Sam Wilson, Captain America. This guy right here. The series deals with Sam Wilson working to become Captain America after Steve Rogers gets super duper old and getting in fights with the government over the way he goes about it. Steve Rogers casts a huge shadow, and Sam Wilson isn't exactly the same kind of Captain America that Steve was. The US government isn't super into it. So a lot of the series deals with the friction between the federal government and Sam Wilson on the way that he goes about what he feels are his responsibilities taking up this role. Another core story element of that series is the US government appointing Joe Walker, aka the US agent, as their official government-sanctioned Captain America, in spite of Sam Wilson being Steve Rogers' appointed successor. And surprise, surprise, Wyatt Russell has just been cast in the role of John Walker for Falcon and Winter Soldier. Coincidence? Could be. I don't think so, though. Next up in November is Eternals. Eternals is really fascinating because it's not a very well-known comic book property. I would say, though, that I think you should read Eternals by Neil Gaiman and John Romita Jr. This is a miniseries which is only 7 issues long. It took the Eternals and totally recontextualized them. It put them all on planet Earth and made them all totally unaware of the fact that they had these incredible powers. Just in general, it's a much more grounded and much more cinematic story than the original Jack Kirby comics were, so I would say this is probably the best place to look for that movie. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is kind of a tricky one because there doesn't really seem to be any specific source material. One of the only things we really know about it is that it's going to deal with the Mandarin, who's typically an Iron Man villain, and in the comics, at least as far as I know, there's never really been any intersect between those two characters. So if I were you, I would just check out the old school Master of Kung Fu comic books by Steve Englehart and Jim Starlin. It'll just get you some general background on the character, and then you can sit back and be along for the ride for whatever the fuck they're gonna do with this movie, because I sure as hell do not know. WandaVision seems to be very much based on Tom King and Gabriel Hernandez Walta's The Vision. The story is all about the Vision synthesizing a family unit for himself and settling down in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. The biggest giveaway here is the strong emphasis on suburban life and Americana imagery, but at the same time it's very surreal and very suspenseful, and it's, I think, one of the best comic books that Marvel's ever come out with. But regardless, that show is going to be buck wild. The next two I'm going to lump together because neither of them have any real clear source material either. That's going to be Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness and Loki. There's no Doctor Strange story called The Multiverse of Madness, so I would just recommend Doctor Strange by Jason Aaron and Chris Bachalo? I have no idea how to say his name. Specifically, I think the Blood in the Ether storyline would be a really great primer since it features so many different Doctor Strange villains that may or may not show up in this sequel. Loki is a little bit trickier because he doesn't necessarily have a long history of his own stories, but there is a brand new series that just started a couple of months ago just called Loki by Daniel Kibblesmith and Oscar Bazaldua, which I'm very much interested in. So maybe you should check that out first. What If is a really long-standing Marvel tradition of giving creators free rein to speculate on things that might have happened if events of famous comic books had gone differently. Presumably the source material for this is going to come more from previous MCU movies than it is from comic books. But there are some rumors going around that there might be some famous Marvel alternate universes that are going to get put on the small screen for this animated series. Most specifically, according to the footage they showed at the D23 Expo, Marvel Zombies. Marvel Zombies was a limited series from 2006 by Walking Dead creator Robert Kirkman and illustrator Sean Phillips before he even wrote Walking Dead. If I were to speculate about any other famous alternate universes that might be coming to the show, I would say maybe check out Marvel 1602 by Neil Gaiman. I don't have any real evidence to back that up besides that just Neil Gaiman TV adaptations are really hot right now. I'd also look at Future Imperfect by Peter David and George Perez. That's just a huge, famous, iconic Marvel story that hasn't really gotten any love in the MCU yet, and I think this might be a good place for it to show up. Also, maybe Thanos Wins by Donny Cates and Jeff Shaw. That comic book was just a huge deal about a year ago, and I feel like Marvel execs might be taking notice. And just goddamn, how cool would it be to get like a super stylized animated rendition of Cosmic Ghost Rider? That would kick ass. Hawkeye is a super easy one. Check out Hawkeye by Matt Fraction and David Aja. It would be wild if you've never heard of this comic book series. Not only do we know for sure that the series is going to feature Kate Bishop, who is a major supporting player in that series, it's also a comic book that's so fucking good, it's just dominated any conversation about that character ever since it came out. If Marvel's not going to take any cues from that comic book series, I don't know what the fuck they're doing, because it's basically the only Hawkeye story that anybody on planet Earth really cares about. Thor: Love and Thunder is another super easy one. Check out Thor by Jason Aaron and Russell Doterman. This is the series where Jane Foster takes up the mantle of Thor after the original Thor is deemed unworthy. This is another one of my favorite comic books from the last few years, and it's super exciting that it's getting an adaptation on the big screen. SheHulk is another one that's a little bit nebulous. I would take a look at Charles Soule and Javier Pulido's run on SheHulk. It's just the most popular iteration of the character from the last few years, and it also, I think, really exemplifies the way that we look at the character in the 21st century. Moon Knight is another tricky one, but if I were Marvel, I would look at Warren Ellis and Declan Shalvey's super short 6-issue run on the character. It tells one overarching story within the space of 6 smaller stories in self-contained issues. Ring ring, hello? Oh, it's television, they want their format back. Miss Marvel. Obviously, just check out Miss Marvel. This character's so new, there's not even really that much to catch up on. Miss Marvel is a series by G. Willow Wilson and a handful of different artists. It's only from like 4 years ago, just started number... I'm dying. It only started like 4 years ago. Just start at number 1 and read through, and you will be as caught up with the character as it is possible to be. So that's everything lined up for Marvel's Phase 4. But what about beyond that? We know about a lot of different projects Marvel still has lined up for the future beyond that. Black Panther 2, not super clear, but I think I speak for everyone when I say we all want to see that Wakanda Atlantis war from Jonathan Hickman's Avengers run. That's gotta happen sooner or later, right? Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, the only thing we really know about it is that Adam Warlock is probably going to be in it. So in that case, I'd check out pretty much anything Jim Starlin worked on in the 80s. Captain Marvel 2? I think Ms. Marvel's probably going to be in it. I don't know. Probably just check out the Kelly Sue DeConnick run, because that is pretty much as iconic a run as there is for that character. Spider-Man 3 and Spider-Man 4, we don't know anything about. But there's only so many Spider-Man villains that they haven't used yet, and honestly, the fact that nobody's adapted Kraven's Last Hunt yet is really, really surprising. Blade. You don't need to read any Blade comic books. Nobody cares about Blade comic books. Just watch the Wesley Snipes movies. That's as much catch-up as I think anybody can really be expected to do. And just as a blanket statement, I think it's pretty safe to say that Secret Invasion is a story you might want to brush up on, as well as anything with the title Young Avengers. Obviously, we've got a big overarching Skrull story in the MCU, as well as a whole bunch of younger superheroes coming up. I think both of those things are going to be pretty safe bets on reading. But that's not all. That's never all. There's so much fucking Marvel stuff. Ghost Rider is coming out on ABC. Check out all new Ghost Rider by Felipe Smith and Trad Moore. Runaways on Hulu. Check out, you guessed it, Runaways by Brian K. Vaughan and Adrian Alfona. Sony's got movies coming out. First up is Morbius. Who would have thought? I sure wouldn't have. Check out Amazing Spider-Man 100 through 102 by Stan Lee and Gil Kane. Venom 2, gonna have Carnage in it. Woody Harrelson's gonna be him. That's a weird casting choice. It's not what this video is about. I would recommend the Maximum Carnage storyline from the 90s, which has got a whole bunch of writers and illustrators on it, as well as the limited series Venom vs. Carnage by Peter Milligan and Clayton Crane. What about Fox? New Mutants. Is that movie ever gonna come out? I don't know, maybe. If it does, I would say check out New Mutants by Chris Claremont and Bill Sienkiewicz. And I think I've recommended pretty much everything I can. As far as I know, that's all the Marvel properties that are officially coming up. But maybe in a year or so, we'll know about a whole lot more, and I can give you some updated recommendations. Would anybody like that? Would anybody like this in the first place? Am I doing this for anybody besides myself? These are all really good questions. But hey, there are reasons for reading comic books besides just wanting to be in the know about movies. Comic books are super good. It is so rare to meet somebody who's actually passionate about reading comic books. And that sucks because especially in the 21st century, comic books are better and more exciting now than they ever have been. So go out and read, not because of the multi-billion-dollar movie franchise, but because they are works of art that deserve to be appreciated for what they are. If you, for some reason, want to hear me talk about comic books any more than I already have here today, you can check out A Study in Marvel, which is a series I do here on this channel where I watch every Marvel movie ever and make video essays about them. And if you want to hear me talk about movies more than I already have here today, I've got a podcast with my sister called No Nerds Allowed, also on this channel. The channel's named after the podcast. So that's it. I think I've gotten it all off my chest. If you take one thing away, read comic books. Just do it. It's worth it. I promise.